On the morning of August 7th, 1944, a column of German Panther tanks rolled through the French countryside near Mortagne, the crews confident beneath 7 inches of frontal armor that no Allied fighter could threaten them from above. Then the sound changed. That low, throaty growl of a Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine, 2,000 horsepower of American engineering screaming at full throttle, came in at 400 miles per hour from the tree line. Within 90 seconds, 4 Panthers were burning. The pilot never dropped a bomb. He hadn't fired a single rocket. He had used something the Germans never expected, a technique improvised in the field by American pilots who turned a lumbering, overweight fighter into the most feared ground attack aircraft in the European theater. The P-47 Thunderbolt weighed 17 to 500 pounds fully loaded. Critics called it a flying bathtub. They were right about the weight. They were completely wrong about what that weight could do. The Thunderbolt's reputation in 1942 was, to put it generously, complicated. When Republic Aviation delivered the first production models, the numbers looked brutal on paper. Empty weight of 10,000 pounds, a massive 18-cylinder radial engine so large that the cockpit sat directly atop it, giving pilots the sensation of flying inside a truck engine. The Focke-Wulf 190, its primary German adversary, weighed just 6,393 pounds empty. German pilots who first encountered the P-47 dismissed it as ungainly. Luftwaffe Commander Adolf Galland reportedly laughed when he reviewed its specs, noting that a fighter that heavy should be dropping cargo, not fighting. Standard thinking in 1942 emphasized agility, tight turning radius, fast climb rate, light airframe. The Thunderbolt, with its 7-ton combat weight, failed every one of those benchmarks. It couldn't outturn a Spitfire. It couldn't climb with a 109. On paper, this shouldn't have worked at all. The secret was in what that massive airframe could absorb and what that monstrous engine could do at altitude. The R2800 Double Wasp produced 2,000 horsepower at 27,000 feet, a performance ceiling that virtually no German propeller aircraft could match at that altitude in 1943. Pilots discovered the aircraft's essential truth not in a test report, but in their first real combat. Dive at 400 miles per hour, which the Thunderbolt's weight enabled through pure physics, and no German fighter could follow you down. What looked like a liability, that crushing mass, became the aircraft's deadliest weapon. Every pound of steel was converted kinetic energy in a dive. The P-47 could accelerate in a descent that simply wasn't achievable for lighter aircraft. Pilots called it going to the bank, climbing high, trading altitude for speed, and arriving at the target with more velocity than any interceptor could generate. The Thunderbolt wasn't slow, it was patient. What actually mattered, though, wasn't revealed until the summer of 1944, when the Allied breakout from Normandy transformed the strategic situation overnight. German armor was moving in daylight, roads were clogged with panzers and half-tracks, and the question shifted immediately. How do you kill a tank from the air? The conventional answer was either level bombing, wildly inaccurate against moving vehicles, or dive bombing with dedicated aircraft. P-47 pilots in the Nyaung Tactical Air Command, under the command of General Elwood Pete Quesada, came up with a different answer. They developed what they called skip bombing, combined with a specific strafing technique that exploited the Thunderbolt's 8 and 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns. Each gun fired 850 rounds per minute. 8 guns delivered 6,800 rounds per minute of armor-piercing incendiary ammunition at a muzzle velocity of 2,910 feet per second. The trick wasn't the weapons, it was the angle. Standard strafing doctrine said to attack at a shallow angle, 10 to 15 degrees, for maximum time on target. Critics argued this maximized the hit zone. They were right about coverage, but wrong about penetration. At 15 degrees, a 50 caliber round skipped off the sloped deck armor of a Panzer IV, or Panther, the way a stone skips off a lake. The armor-piercing round needed a steeper impact angle to bite. American pilots, through trial, error, and examination of wrecked tanks, worked out the exact solution. Attack at 30 to 45 degrees, diving at 350 miles per hour minimum, aiming not at the front of the tank, but at the rear deck where engine grills were thinnest, typically 25 mm of armor compared to the 80 mm frontally. The rear deck ran hot. One armor-piercing incendiary round through the engine compartment's ventilation grill meant fire. Fire meant dead tank. A single firing pass of approximately 2 seconds from 8 guns delivered roughly 226 rounds into a 15-foot target area. The math was merciless. The proof came at Falaise in August 1944 during the destruction of the German 7th Army. Between August the 12th and August 21st, P-47s of the Nyaung Tactical Air Command flew over 12,000 sorties over what became known as the Falaise Pocket. A German force of approximately 100,000 troops and over 2,000 armored vehicles attempted to escape encirclement. Allied after-action reports, later corroborated by German records, documented the destruction of 220 tanks, 160 self-propelled guns, 700 artillery pieces. and over 5,000 vehicles of all types. A German officer captured during the breakout attempt, Oberstleutnant Hans von Luck of the 21st Panzer Division, later wrote in his memoirs that the terror of Allied air attack had fundamentally changed how German armor could be employed, specifically that tanks could no longer move freely during daylight hours. His troops began calling P-47s Jabos, short for Jog Bomber, fighter bomber, with a dread usually reserved for artillery. These weren't aircraft they feared, they were mobile death sentences. The technique worked because of something deeper than angle of attack. This wasn't accidental. Quesada's pilots developed what amounted to a complete system of armored vehicle attack that exploited every characteristic of the Thunderbolt specifically. The aircraft's 8 guns were harmonized to converge at 300 yards, creating a concentrated impact zone about 6 feet wide, exactly the span of a Panther's rear deck grille. The R-2800 engine's reliability meant pilots could press attacks to minimum altitude without worrying about combat damage grounding their planes. The Thunderbolt could absorb ground fire that would have destroyed lighter aircraft. 156th Fighter Group P-47 returned to base in England in late 1943 with over 100 small arms holes in its airframe. The pilot reported the aircraft handled a little sluggishly. This wasn't a boast. It was a design principle. Republic's engineers had, intentionally or not, built the aircraft that was most capable of surviving the thing it was best at, flying straight and level through enemy fire while putting bullets precisely on target. Commanders weren't clinging to tradition when they kept assigning the Thunderbolt to ground attack missions deep into 1945. They had the performance data. By the end of the European campaign, P-47 pilots had destroyed an officially credited 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, and 68,000 railway cars. No other Allied aircraft in the European theater came close to those numbers in the ground attack role. The Mustang was faster and had longer range. The Typhoon could carry rockets. But neither had the Thunderbolt's combination of durability, firepower concentration, and the ability to press an attack and then escape. What made the Thunderbolt work wasn't any single feature, but rather the specific combination of an engine that didn't quit, a frame that absorbed punishment, 8 guns that delivered catastrophic fire density, and a weight that turned dives into kinetic weapons. The deeper lesson of the Thunderbolt's transformation into a tank killer was about what combat actually demands versus what peacetime testing reveals. Battlefields aren't test ranges. They're chaotic, dirty, and full of variables that no engineering specification anticipates. The German Panther was, by nearly every objective metric, a superior design to the American Sherman tank. Better gun, more armor, more sophisticated suspension. Yet, Panther crews dreaded Thunderbolts, not because of any technical shortcoming in their vehicles, but because the system arrayed against them had been designed to function in the chaos of real combat. The P-47's size, dismissed as a flaw, gave it the fuel capacity for extended loiter time over target areas. It carried 2,000 pounds of external ordnance, while still flying evasively. Its air-cooled radial engine wouldn't leak out its life's blood from a single rifle bullet, the way a liquid-cooled Merlin might. The morning at Mortain that opened this story ended with 4 burning Panthers and a 5th abandoned by its crew in a ditch, the commander having decided that an operational tank was worth less than a living tank crew. The pilot who made that pass, Lieutenant Colonel David Schilling of the 56th Fighter Group, later calculated that his 2-second firing burst had delivered approximately 240 rounds across the rear deck of a 60-ton tank. The Panther's deck armor at that point was 17 millimeter thick, a full inch of hardened steel. The M2's armor-piercing round at that range penetrated 18 millimeters. The margin was less than a millimeter. That, precisely, is what the American trick was. Not exotic technology, not a secret weapon program, just pilots who understood their machine well enough to put a .50 caliber round through a gap that shouldn't, technically, have been enough. They knew the physics, they trusted the airframe, and they made the math work at 350 miles per hour, 2 seconds at a time, over burning French fields in the summer of 1944.